Hey everyone, I wanted to first talk about, I need my mic. What do you know about this? I got this in Goodwill. Unbelievable mic. I wanted to talk about the Stanford Prison Experiment really quick. Now, this is a very interesting experiment, control groups experiments. Lombardo, I want to say his name is, he was a pretty scurrilous character, which we're going to get into in a second. Now, although don't tell him I said that, he probably has a ton of billion-dollar lawyers that will probably sue me, but we're going to talk about that after. Now, he basically is breaking up this group into two subgroups, right? So you basically have an independent variable. What is it? It's the role, right? So you basically have the prison guards, and then you have the prisoners. And then, so that's the main variable. Then you have what we call in research method attributes. You have the guard and the prisoner, right? So you have that one variable, right? The roles, and then you have different attributes of that. So he's breaking them into those two attributes to see if there is an effect on their behavior. And later, and this is where we get into the iffy part, their psychological development or lack of. Basically, are they going to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that? So what's he trying to do? Well, one of the reasons why we have studies like this, the Stanford Prison Experiment, is because after World War II, a lot of these scholars were obsessed with this idea of like Eichmann's argument in Israel before he was hung, was that a lot of these people in the who were involved in actually carrying out the horrible Holocaust was that they were just following orders, right? So one of the things that we became kind of obsessed with, particularly in the 1960s, that's why people started rebelling against authority and stuff, is that kind of blinded view of authority, right? And what you do with authority. And there was another zeitgeist at the time, and that was prison reform. Are we bringing in prisoners who have, say, maybe just, petty crimes, and then turning them into, full-fledged criminals? And that's why for example, recidivism rate is so high. That's why our prison system, a lot of people think, fails to work well. So you have to understand it during that time when Lombardi was doing this test. You have right after World War II, I mean, obviously a couple decades after, but the idea that were the Nazis just following orders, right? Would everyone, not everyone, but would we become a little sadistic and horrible if we had that role of a prison guard? Right. So this was 100% one of the things in the background here, submitting to authority. Right. And do we become in these certain roles a little fascistic? The other thing is prison reform. Does prisoner, being in prison in and of itself break people down and have the opposite effect that we would want? So instead of saying reforming people, they get post-traumatic stress disorder. This becomes one of the major issues. So his goal was to take these, somewhat university educated students, they didn't graduate yet, all from kind of similar backgrounds. They have to take a test, right, to make sure they're all the same in a psychological way and stuff like that. They're not suffering depression, suicidal thoughts, etc. And then randomly assign them to these roles, prison guard and prisoners. Well, what happened was, as you'll see, that these guards became somewhat sadistic and the prisoners kind of broke down. There's a lot to it here. So you really get what a real experiment is with real people, right? Is it ethical though? Right? Like, let's say, for example, and I've tried this, I want to try to make the ASU, Arizona State University, waterboarding, simulation. And I want to take some students and waterboard them to see if they can survive, or they'll get, or see if they get traumatized. Pretty unethical. Would be an interesting study. But I mean, so there's an ethical part here. But even aside from the obvious ethical dilemma of such a research in this prison experiment, we have the fact that Lombardi was actually coaxing leading these guards to be more sadistic. There's evidence now that strongly suggests that he wasn't this kind of, innocent eye observer, but was pushing in a certain direction in order to get certain results. This is where we kind of ask ourselves, to what extent is the researcher independent from research itself? Because let's face it, a lot of researchers want certain results because that will get them published. That might get them famous. That will get them more money. That will get them, grants, etc. So basically fame. So, there's a good, what I like about this documentary is that it really shows how, unethical a lot of these researchers can be, just thinking of themselves, publishing, etc. But also the fact that comes out to light later that he was actually not this innocent player, that he wanted and pushed strongly. He was very assertive with this, borderline aggressive with trying to get certain results to fit the model that the prison system is very bad. And obviously this has to do with, fame. If you get, let's face it. If this study ended up being a big dud, right? They just, went there, came normal, I just hung out and left. What would that have done to his career? So there's a lot of careerism in the academic world, and we have to start thinking about this when we do analyze a lot of this research. If you want a grant with the United States government, you're going to basically kiss the butt of the United States government. Like, for example, using State Department documents to code for political terror. Right? But the State Department does support political terror across the United States. Across the world. So the question is, what do we want from research? Sometimes researchers, and often, they want it to fall in a certain direction. And I think that that is something very, very important to understand. And I think this documentary really shows that it's obvious that he wants a certain outcome. He does not want these kids to just come out as they went in, because if they did, what's the whole point of the study, right? So he definitely was involved in it. It's an interesting study, however, to see how experiments are done. You're basically taking real life people, this is the social world, and putting them in a situation that will change their behavior, and we want to measure the change of this behavior. Like I said, in the more medicinal world, right, scientific world, you could get people to take the COVID vaccination, some people not to take the COVID vaccination, and then they come back to see if the people with the COVID vaccination are less likely to get COVID, or if they do, the symptoms are not as intense. So that's like an experiment control group. This is interesting because you're using real people. And, one of the characters, if you really watch it, he is so sensitive, just so fragile at the end when he's talking. And then the prison guard says something like, oh, I didn't know I had it in me. I wanted to do my little experiment myself, etc. You do see how people might be abusive when they get power. And this was kind of the zeitgeist of the time, right? You're studying the Nazis took power and became extremely abusive. Dictators become abusive. People change constitutions so they can keep on running. You see that in Latin America and other countries. In the old adage, absolute power corrupts absolutely, is giving, say, prison guards so much power that they do sometimes, cross the line, even when they might be good people in other situations. And that's what I think is kind of interesting with it. You can't really damn liberals won't let us anymore, do studies like this anymore on human beings, because, there is that ethical component where when you're dealing with these people, you're likely to traumatize them. And this is where Lombardi has been criticized, because it's not just you're using human subjects, right? But you're pushing them to be more sadistic in order to get results, and those results can be traumatizing. But the way we would see this related to research, it is an experimental study. You're taking basic people, right? You're putting them in a certain situation, whether you think it's ethical or not, and you're seeing if their behavior changes over time attributable to the role they have. So that is extremely important to kind of understand. And I want you people to kind of understand that this is a real experiment and needs to be taken seriously. But the problem is when you're dealing with people, and now it's been, criticized using animals and other things, we used to use prisoners, that we can't really do this anymore. So this is why I think this documentary is so important, because it's not like I say in jest, but there is, importance to it. What happens if I wanted to do the ASU, Arizona State University, waterboarding simulation study, and I waterboard students? Damn liberals won't let me, right? That would be an interesting study. See, it does traumatize, it can kill people, etc. But you can't do them. That's why I think this study is so important over time, because you just don't see it anymore, and you're not supposed to. And in fact, I believe that this is why we have the internal review board, where it's like now we have if we're going to do research, we have to pass this exam to show that you're not going to hurt anyone. I was doing just archival research in Latin America, particularly Nicaragua, and they made me go through this huge process to show that I'm not going to hurt anyone. I'm like, I'm just doing archival research, right? Like that article that you actually read. And it's very, very important because they're very sensitive about this. So this also has an ethical component about research. To what extent can you use people, right, in these kind of experimental researches, which makes the social sciences, to a certain degree, a little more difficult. So thanks a lot for that. And I hope you do enjoy the documentary. If you do choose to do your presentation, remember, this is about experiments. You basically have the roles of the two attributes, which are the prison guard and the prisoner, and then the measurement of behavior to see somehow to measure whether they are getting worse. And one of the goals of Lombardi is actually to reform, in my opinion, to reform the prison system, which isn't necessarily a bad goal, right? Because if it's not doing what it's supposed to do and it's making, petty criminals into bigger criminals, this becomes problematic. So, that's kind of how it's valuable for research to understand kind of experiments in the real social world. So thanks a lot, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoy the documentary.